I've been thinking about this a lot lately. You know, your characters have, I don't know how you do it with the time when you do different eras and yet the story merges so seamlessly and so beautifully. Does it come to you that way? Do you work with your editor? How does this come about?
You know, I outline everything before I start writing. So I figure out the characters first. I don't know if that's what you do. You find the characters first?
Yeah, I kind of do. I guess. I don't know. I feel like I find the world. I'm like, I think they're real. Like I'm not nuts. I see, oh, they're coming over. I do.
Oh yeah, I'm watching the movie in my head as I'm writing.
Always, right?
It definitely exists.
You obviously spent a ton of time in the library.
Yes. Yeah. And I was able to get a seat in the Allen room there, which is for writers with book contracts. Keep that in mind.
I was never invited there. I
no,
just with the general population.
No, but you just have to look it up. They told me about it. And then suddenly I was in and I was writing a book about the library in the library, which was just so
that's
great.
so great. That's
yeah.
So
and especially if you do historical fiction the way we do,
yes.
and you're doing research on like the Big Band era or something like that.
Yeah.
They deliver books right to your bookshelf. So you don't even have to go get them.
All right. Fiona, we'll talk about this later. And we also want to encourage everybody else that wants to write a book for get on the train. Fiona, tell them what's great about this, because I believe, first of all, I'm annoyed most days when I'm doing research because it's all men.
Mm-hmm.
You have to dig with a shovel to find women. Now, and I mean that when, like, I got to be in my bonnet about Orson Welles recently, and I've read everything. The only time they talk about women is when they're going to get laid. Excuse me, I didn't mean to say it like that. That's how they talk.
I know.
And I thought, surely somebody helped you with a script or in the directing or the cutting or something. We have to do this.
Mm-hmm. No, the women in the past were faded into the background, you know, no matter what they did. And so that's why
we invented the screenplay. June Mathis invented the form that we use today on Final Draft. You know this. Anita Luce, Frances Marion, the greats. They sold their little stories to magazines. They were called serials then, and then sold them to the movies. And then here's what happens when industry starts making any money, they throw the women out.
Yeah.
Not publishing.
Yeah. And there were great women directors, and then suddenly it became a male domain.
That's right.
Yeah.
And by the way, the movies were, oh my God, think of the movies with the shop girls and the women, and you could just list all these great films with roles. I mean, Loretta Young got out when she was 38 to the movies, and then she went into TV, and she got out of TV when she was 48.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's how it was then. You had to get out.
And that's why, like, something like the Heterodoxy Club, which is a club that my character stumbles upon in the
I couldn't pronounce it. I just read it like heterodoxy.
Heterodoxy.
I have it here. And they're the feminists in Greenwich Village, which I thought was so, because I'm sitting here in Greenwich Village, I thought it was so hip.
Of the 1910s. And they were talking about birth control and women's rights and the right to vote, and even free love, which is something I think of as 1960s, you know, or 70s. But no, they were hashing it out in the 1910s. And so it's fun to bring them to life because it really existed. It was an incredible women's group where women could debate the issues of the time. And so to have my character Laura, who lives in the library and is kind of sheltered and, you know, surrounded by all these books, but feels stifled, to have her go to the J school and then stumble upon the Heterodoxy Club just propels her into a world that kind of blows her mind. And you know, as an author, that's what you want to do. You want to put your characters into really tense situations and get them in trouble.
You did something that I thought was so artful with their names. I'm a name nut. I know a lot of the ladies listening in are too. You made, to me, the older character, Sadie is an older name and Laura is a younger name, and you flipped them. Why did you do that?
I like the idea that both characters, I love that you caught that. Both characters are really out of step with their time.
Fiona, I read the books. What do you want from me?
No one else.
That's why Patty had me on. She says, I know you read these things.
You're the only one. You're the only one.
Oh my God. I think it's unconscionable that people don't read books and then they interview people. I've been in that position, and it's like working in a coal mine. You have to explain everything. It's like, oh, and it's already.
No, I'm not complaining though. I have to say I've had some amazing interviews since the book came out last Tuesday. But yeah, so they're both out of step with their time. Laura in the 1910s, she's gotten involved with this very forward-thinking feminist club downtown on McDougal Street. And then Sadie lives in 1990s, and she's a curator of rare books at the New York Public Library.
There's a thread between them.
There's a thread between them. And Sadie loves things of the past. So she wears vintage clothes. She works with rare books. And she just doesn't quite fit in with the 1990s of Doc Martens, and you remember all those.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's what I like, that they're both just not quite right. If they were switched,
they were born in the wrong. Yeah.
Yep.
And I loved that. But that's one of the delicious ways you paint your scenes, because it gets you thinking.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun to have them try to find their voice, because they don't have them in either time period. Even in the 1990s, when you think women would feel more empowered, Sadie does not.
Tell us what it's like. I love that Patty was saying pivoting, because people are feeling kind of hopeless right now. Mm-hmm. Which is why I found you're such a comfort read. I read it at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was like, so great. Well, I read it maybe even before that, but for this, of course, I went back in. But I just find any book of yours that I would pick up, I would be transported to another place. You care very much about details, and you also care about different time periods, what happened during them. And I'm about to wind into something here, because everything connects.
I love it.
So I'm having Kurt Anderson on. Is he coming up your way, Patty? He wrote a book called Evil Geniuses. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now you might suppose, oh, I'm not going to read that because of whatever, but he said something about halfway through it at the beginning that plays into your book. He said when he was a boy, I don't know how old Kurt is. He might be in his 60s or 70s. I don't know. But he wrote Spy Magazine, and he's a journalist, but he also writes novels. But he said when he was a kid, like he remembered the 1950s. It was like the 1950s, and people dressed a certain way and played kinds of music and ate certain foods. Then when the 60s came, it changed. He said, then when the 70s came, it changed again, and the 80s. Mm-hmm. He said, but since the 90s, nothing's really changed between 97 and 2020. Mm-hmm. And I went, well, that's a bold statement, but then I started to think about it. And I went, it's true. The fashions really haven't changed. And he said, that's our surrender to having the same freaking salaries we had 30 years ago.
Ooh.
Okay? Now I'm telling you this because this is going to put us out of business in historical fiction. It's been flotsam drifting. Have you noticed this?
That's interesting. I'm trying to think about music or literature.
Fashion. Well, the music doesn't. Think about the music. Really?
Yeah. Yeah, you compare the 90s to the 20s or the 70s to the 20s. Yeah.
That's right. So you would compare. I also did this trick. I thought about, well, at the turn of the centuries, it's always the airplane, the car, electricity, shoes. Prior to 1990, every pair of shoes made in the world that were worn by human beings were made by hand.
Wow.
They found glue in the Congo, the rubber tree plant, and they could start to make factory-made shoes. Now, my grandfather was a shoemaker, and that's how I know that. So what is our legacy at the beginning of this century? The phone?
I wonder if it's not the internet has made all the information available to everyone, so there's no longer gradations of
I'm going to say that to credit, and I'll credit you.